Trade these days is much more related to services than it is to goods. And services are heavily regulated, which in a way that goods used to be but are not now. And that means that to deal with these, you have to have a degree of almost harmonization of your regulatory approaches. That's right at the heart of the sovereignty question. Are you regulated from Brussels or are you regulated from London? There's something of the order of 16,000 regulations that are coming directly from Brussels to cover all sorts of things, from food safety through to financial services and banking. Well, we've been in the European Union for 40 years. You can't reverse that easily, because we don't really understand what all the primary and secondary effects will be. Some of these could be really quite large. What we must try and do is do the minimum in the first case, so that we can take a deep breath and look quite hard at the whole folio of regulatory norms that we want to change, and change those in slower time, so minimizing the costs of adjustment.
Brexit means Brexit.
If Brexit is Brexit, what does success look like? Well, I think for most of the Brexiteers, it would look like almost as much economic integration as we've got at the moment, but with a few important exceptions. Free movement of labour, contributions to the EU budget, most likely. Most other members of the EU are unlikely to be in favour of giving up free movement of labour in exchange for practically no change in the access for UK goods and services into the EU. One can expect some pretty hard pounding on that particular set of issues. I think on the budget, they will want budget contributions if we get full single market access, because that's what the Norwegians do and that's what the Swiss do in their relations with the EU. Again, that's another area where it's going to be very hard for the Brexiteers to accept. The very successful outcome looks very unlikely. The key trade-offs that have to be made from a British perspective, I would say, are how much are we willing to give up of single market access in exchange for reduced freedom of movement of labour. Because those two are closely linked in the minds of almost everyone else in continental Europe, and breaking them is not a straightforward issue. No one knows all of the detail, so it's a question of when you come to it, you may have to deal with it. If I put it this way, it's complexity all the way down, and until we start finding out what happens when we try to do certain sorts of transactions, then we will know whether or not we've got access to the single market, for example. Go for the minimum change you can get away with to maintain British competitiveness and access to the single market. And don't be over ambitious about what you think you can squeeze out of the other side. Things have to be in their interest as well as yours. And that's true of the Americans as much as it's true of the EU. And if you want to sign an agreement with the Americans, they'll come along with a big book and say, sign at the bottom. And that's what you'll get. And you may negotiate for 3 months or 3 years or even 10 years, but you'll still only get what's in the book. China has done agreements with, for example, Switzerland and Norway, which barely open the Chinese market, but do open the Norwegian and Swiss markets. So the thought that somehow or other we're going to do wonderful deals with them when we're smaller and a smaller market and have less clout in the world, it just seemed to me to be a mistake.